Hi, everyone, and welcome to our second Coffee with Cassie. Today, we're in the Everett Municipal Building where our office is, and I'm enjoying some tea with Heide Brillantes, who is our budget manager. Welcome, Heide. So good to have you here.
Thank you, Mayor Cassie. I appreciate the invitation to join this episode, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you today.
Me too. So, Heide, you are fairly new to the city.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your role and what you do here?
Sure. I started at the City of Everett in January of this year. As budget manager, I work with administration as well as all other city teams to plan, coordinate, and update our city's budget. My daily tasks may include financial planning, modeling and forecasting revenues and expenditures. Labor analysis is a big one, as well as managing the general government's capital projects funds. But there's also a host of other processes.
It's a big job.
Yes.
And what were you doing beforehand?
I spent over 7 years at the Office of the Washington State Auditor, auditing both local and state governments, many of which are actually located here in Snohomish County. So I did serve as the auditor in charge of financial statement and compliance audits. So during my tenure, really analyzing, interpreting governmental accounting and auditing standards, as well as federal, state, and local requirements, gave me the opportunity to become familiar with governmental finance and budgets through a wide variety of sources.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and we are so grateful to have you here now as part of our city team, and no wonder you were able to hit the ground running and dive right into our budget with the expertise you have. So thank you so much. Right now, we are in one of our busiest times of year, our budgeting time, and I know that this is a lot of work for you and your team.
Yes, we started the budget process with all of our city teams months ago, but I really don't think people realize how much goes into creating a city's budget.
Yeah, it's really a year-round process. I remember when I was a city council member, we received the budget kind of towards the fall, and that's when the budgeting process starts for council, but it really starts at the beginning of the year for staff.
Absolutely. And since this is, I'm fairly new to the city, I'd be interested in hearing about your experience over the last 6 years as mayor.
Wow. Okay. Well, I don't think we have time for that today, but I did talk a little bit about this in our last Coffee with Cassie. So I would encourage you or anyone else who's interested to watch that Coffee with Cassie for kind of the full history. But I can tell you just in short that, this has been an incredible experience to be mayor these last 6 years and work with our really talented staff team. We face a lot of challenges, and we face them from day one. Everything from violent crime, the opioid crisis, now the fentanyl crisis, global pandemic, homelessness, and a structural deficit. But we also have had some incredible opportunities and great things happening in the city as well.
It's definitely been quite a ride as mayor. But before we dive any deeper into this, including everyone's favorite topic, which is the structural deficit, I think it'd be great to cover a few of our budget basics with our audience.
Definitely. Cities' budgets are very complicated. So here's a short video we created going over the essentials of city budget.
The City of Everett is growing, and with that growth comes changes that demand more from city government. How your city invests tax dollars is important. It's one of the most important decisions made by your elected officials each year. Whether you own a business or work here, are single or a family, rent or own property, or care about city services like public safety, human needs, parks, or the library, you'll be impacted by what the city spends. What your city spends on roads affects how you get to work or how you get your kids to school. And what your city spends on police, fire, and streetlights can affect how safe you feel in your neighborhood. The City of Everett's budget is really about people and our shared priorities. The city budget is an annual spending plan. It estimates the amount of money that will come in and communicates how that money will be invested across the community. The city is required by law to adopt a balanced budget each year, which means our expenditures cannot be greater than our revenues. Achieving a balanced budget is challenging. Inflation impacts everyone. Just like we all experience in our daily lives, the city feels the pinch of inflation in the rising cost of delivering essential services to the community. Everett's budget includes two main areas of service: general government and non-general government. Non-general government services are self-supporting and not dependent on general government tax revenues. Examples include our transit agency and regional water and sewer utility. The general government is funded mostly by taxes and includes services like public safety, library and parks, and road maintenance. How your city spends its budget comes from decisions made by the mayor and city council. How a city provides services, sets priorities, and spends money affects you. Your input is an important part of the process. You can make your voice heard by contacting your mayor and council members. More information can be found online at everettwa.gov/budget.
Hopefully that video was helpful for our audience in really understanding how a city budget works. It's a lot more complicated government budgets than your household budgets, and so my hope is that this will help educate our residents and everyone on how to better engage with us in the budget process.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. I hope that video encourages more people to get involved in the process.
We both mentioned structural deficit. Yeah, I think you said it's our favorite topic. I don't know if it's my favorite topic or not. It's definitely a big challenge that we've had, and I think it's important for everyone to understand really what a structural deficit is. You know, in short, I see it as the revenues and expenses don't match. So our expenses are growing faster than our revenues, and we are growing as a city. So it makes sense that the cost of services goes up every year, but our revenue isn't matching that, right?
Right. At the most basic level, a structural deficit means that the revenues coming in aren't enough to cover all of the expenses that we need to pay for, and it hasn't for a number of years. So for Everett, this means that our revenues aren't able to keep up with the rising cost of providing the services that our residents rely upon. And I know that this has been a top priority for your administration to address. How has the deficit changed over the years, and what do you believe is causing it?
Well, the cause of that deficit is really the 1% cap on property tax that passed, I believe, in 2001, and Initiative 747. And when that passed, I understand folks are really concerned about their increasing property taxes, but our city's costs go up by far more than 1% a year. And so that limits our ability to grow with the services that we need to grow, like fire, police, parks, keeping up with our roads, everything that we do as a city. So that 1% cap is what really causes the structural deficit.
Right. The budget is so complex, right? As a full service city, we have to account for and fund a variety of services. And all of those have their own unique set of requirements. How does that factor into our budget challenges?
Yeah, I think the fact that our city provides really so many different services to our residents is part of our challenge, right? We are one of the only municipalities with an animal shelter. We operate our own fire department. We have a library. Many cities don't operate those directly. They contract with another entity, or they've moved to a regional authority on some of them. So that actually helps balance their budgets better. And so since the city continues to do all that on its own, we have those additional challenges as well. But I would like to mention that, you know, we have a transit department and a regional utility, and our transit department is a different bucket. You know, I think that's something that would be helpful for our residents to understand when we're talking about our structural deficit, what we mean and how the other funds that we have in the city do or do not impact that. And maybe that's something you could elaborate on.
Absolutely. And, you know, you had mentioned that our water and sewer regional utility and transit department do bring in revenue. However, it doesn't really help our structural deficit because they're not considered part of the general government, which is our core services. Even if we were to, for example, merge with community transit, that wouldn't benefit or reduce our structural deficit.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, there's a lot of benefits to exploring moving to regional systems, but in this case, it really wouldn't impact our deficit. It might have other pros and cons, but I think it's important that we just kind of dig in and say, okay, how do we handle this structural deficit? And as we deal with that deficit, it's kind of a balancing act. We have all of these really important core services that we need to provide our residents that they rely on, whether it's public safety or roads and infrastructure, but we also want to enrich and add to the quality of life and the experience that our residents have and bring fun stuff to the city. And so that balancing act is very hard when we're dealing with such a difficult challenge as this budget.
Right. And I'm sure that our residents can relate, right? As everything's getting more expensive, the revenues itself aren't covering those expenses. And what we've heard over the years is that if revenues aren't coming in, then we should do what any family would do, and that's to make some cuts. And I know that in your first few years, major cuts had been made. Can you talk about those?
Sure. Yeah. In my first year in office, when I was working on my very first budget, we were facing a $13 million deficit that we had to close that gap. And so I issued a mayoral directive and, kind of outlined steps that we could take as a city to attempt to reduce that deficit and close that gap. We worked with our community. We got a lot of great feedback from our residents on what they thought we could and should do. We got great feedback from our staff. We did make a lot of very difficult cuts. Anywhere we saw efficiencies, if a position was vacated, we didn't fill it. Those are very painful decisions to make. We also did some creative things to close the gap. We began to explore public-private partnerships with our Parks Department. Really expensive but very important programs are recreation programs for your residents. And so we knew that although we really wanted those services, we couldn't continue to afford to provide them all on our own. And so through public-private partnerships, we've been able to maintain really important services such as our senior center or other programs that come to our Parks Department. So that's been one tool that we've had. Another one, I think, is just some of the changes we made in our health and benefits, and creating a city-sponsored clinic actually reduced our costs there dramatically. And so some of those really creative steps that both, some of them were direct suggestions from our residents and some direct suggestions from staff, and we just rolled up our sleeves and started to implement those. But now we're at this point where we can't continue to just cut. There's really nothing left to cut.
Let's fast forward to now. The city has made cuts where it can and also enacted other money-saving measures over the years. But the city still has a deficit. And let's talk about why that is. Revenues are still not able to keep up with expenses.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Heidi. As you know, it's really a revenue challenge. We have done a number of things over the years that are really not sustainable. So every time we have that gap, and after all the cuts we've made, we decide not to fund capital projects that are really necessary, or we don't replace vehicles that we desperately need to replace. Those types of measures are not long-term sustainable steps that we can take as a city.
On a plus side, it's been a great and strong year for development, and that does bring in more tax dollars.
Yeah, and that's been fantastic to see. That really helped a lot this year. But each time that happens, we are so grateful. We're excited to see that growth, but we can't rely on that year after year. So we can't base our city's budget on that type of positive growth that happens in one year and then maybe not the next.
Right. So this is clearly a revenue issue. Can you talk about maybe some of the options our city has to bring in more revenue?
Yeah, there's a few things. Many cities have taken steps, for example, to create regional fire authorities or to join regional fire authorities. And what something like that does is it takes the fire department services out of the city's general fund budget, and a new entity then provides those services. But those are tax dollars that are moved to that new entity. So we could also bring a levy lid lift forward to our voters for their consideration, that where they would voluntarily increase property taxes because those resources then would be used for those essential services, police, fire, everything that we need to provide them.
Absolutely. And with all this in mind, let's talk about the priorities for the 2024 budget. Although circumstances may change from year to year, generally the major priorities for Everett haven't. We've always focused on the overall quality of life, which includes community safety, housing, transportation, and infrastructure, economic, workforce, and cultural vitality, having an engaged and an informed community, all really built with the foundation that City of Everett wants to ensure that it's a responsive and responsible government. Can you share with us your top priorities for next year's budget?
Well, you kind of hit them all on the nail. Public safety remains a top priority. I think it's first and foremost our number one priority to provide our residents a safe community that they can live and grow and go to work and go to school and feel like the city is going to take care of those challenges. And that's been, difficult in these last years with some of the rising crime that we're seeing. So you'll see prioritized investments around public safety and police, and also community development and response to challenges like homelessness and the opioid crisis, that we want to make sure that we have dollars designated for that important work to help those that are really vulnerable and need additional services, whether it's through our grant program or other programs that the city is offering.
I know that we've received external funding, which has helped mitigate the issues that we've had with the deficit. Can you talk about some of those?
Yeah, sure. A big support that we received during the pandemic was the American Rescue Plan dollars. Cities across the country really needed those dollars to recover from COVID. And so those have helped us maintain really essential programs and services in a time that otherwise we wouldn't be able to maintain them. But that was vital because this is the time our residents need those services most. Another thing I think that we've done as a city is really prioritize seeking additional grant dollars. The federal government, the state has a lot of opportunities for us as a city, and it's important that we have the team able to go after those dollars and match those with the services that we are providing. So that has been something that we've been very aggressive about, and I think we've been very successful in getting additional federal and state resources to help us with this work.
In addition to safety, what other things are we focused on in this budget?
Well, there's a lot of fun in the budget too. We definitely want to focus on economic development activities, tourism, and just special events, things that really impact the quality of life for our residents and visitors. I think some things that all of our residents enjoy, whether it's our cultural arts or in programs like Sorticulture or our 4th of July festival, those activities are in this budget as well.
Oh, that's perfect. And as far as the budget process, what can we look forward to?
We've had some work already, as we've talked about, obviously year-round. In late August, we did a briefing to our council budget committee. On September 20th, I gave my budget message for the council and the community, which really highlights some of the priorities we discussed. In late fall, there's additional budget briefings as well as public hearings on our budget. And that's really a great opportunities for our public to really tune in and listen to the council as they discuss the budget. And in November and December, council passes the final budget. I present the budget to them, and then they have the opportunity to make some changes towards the end of the year. And then we will finalize and have our 2024 budget, as you know.
Yes. We covered a lot of ground in our conversation today. In a couple of sentences, what is the most important thing that you'd like our viewers to remember?
So our budget process is extensive. We do a lot of work to balance our priorities, and we're really thoughtful during that process. And our residents, I hope they know that the work that we put in, but I also hope our residents understand that we do have a real structural deficit, and we will have to develop a long-term revenue source to manage that. Otherwise, many services that are necessary would be dramatically reduced, and so no one wants that. So that this will be an ongoing discussion with our community, and I guess the final thing I really want our viewers or residents to understand is their input matters greatly. So reaching out to the mayor's office, reaching out to the council, sharing their priorities with us really helps inform our decisions, which is why we've set the priorities that we have based on those conversations.
The budget is such an important topic, and one that I know can be confusing. And I really hope that for the viewers, we've covered quite a bit of questions that they may have had on the budget.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Heidi. I mean, it's been so valuable to have this conversation with you, and I just appreciate your expertise so much, and really glad to have you leading our budget process and being part of that important work. So thank you.
No, I appreciate being here, Mayor Cassie. Thank you.
There's so much more for us to talk about. Each future episode of Coffee with Cassie is going to be dedicated to digging into those important topics and all the great work that's occurring across our city. It's our hope that after watching these videos, our viewers feel more informed and empowered to make your voices heard on critical issues. So I'd like to give another shout out to our finance team for all their hard work this budget season. Well, actually year round. So really big kudos to the City of Everett Finance Department. And thank you all for joining us for Coffee with Cassie. And I look forward to seeing you next time.